Yeah, I just wanted to say, as I said in my post this morning, draining the swamp to my mind doesn't involve putting industry insiders from the coal industry and gasoline and gas and fossil fuel corporations directly in charge of the EPA. I don't know about you, but I actually have a brain, so this looks like the opposite of draining the swamp to me. It looks like, Trump has actually found an additional source of water to, fill the swamp up with, it. I wish I could say that this was a new low or something, but it's unfortunately par for the course. It's, although disappointing, it's, more of the same as it ever was, but here we go. Consider the first 2 years of Trump's EPA. He appointed former Oklahoma Attorney Scott Pruitt to head the agency, which had sued the EPA 14 times to try and reduce the stringency of regulations. Among Trump's other appointees were Andrew Wheeler, a former coal industry lobbyist who was appointed the EPA's deputy administrator. Nancy Beck, formerly an executive at the American Chemistry Council, who was appointed, the deputy assistant administrator of the EPA's Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. Eric Baptist, formerly a senior counsel at the American Petroleum Institute, was appointed at the EPA's senior deputy general counsel. Samantha Dravis who was formerly the attorney for an organization of conservative political donors led by billionaire brothers Charles G. and David H. Koch. Koch, was appointed to EPA's senior counsel and associate for the Administrator for Policy. Within 4 months, Pruitt had moved to roll back 30 EPA regulations, bypassing much consultation with the EPA technical staff. By June 2019, the number of rollbacks was up to 83. Pruitt had also outsourced the crucial work of rewriting the regulations to a network of lawyers, lobbyists, and other allies, especially sought through the Republican Attorney General's Association. Since 2023, the group has collected. Since 2013, the group has collected 4.2 million from fossil fuel related companies like ExxonMobil, Koch Industries, Murray Energy, and the Southern Company. Davenport, New York Times. The rules being revised in covered areas ranging from pesticides to wetland protection to chemical plants to climate change. Over the first 6 months, Pruitt was in charge. Enforcement efforts also plummeted with the EPA, collecting 60% less in penalties imposed on polluters than at the same time periods for President Obama and President George Bush. In the process, Pruitt's schedule revealed that he met with industry representatives 25 times more frequently than the public interest or environmental groups. Davis, one of Pruitt's appointees above, had 90 meetings with industry interest over the 9.9-month period in 2017, meeting with just one public interest organization. Pruitt also fired many members of the EPA Science Advisory Board. He prevented the EPA-funded scientists, many of the experts in the relevant fields, from serving on those boards, and also welcomed industry lobbyists into the scientific advisory boards. It's as if we are a country that has lost any degree of critical thought, or reason. I wish that I could say that, that this was, new, that this was a new low or something, but unfortunately, and as disappointing as these appointments have proven, and Trump's new appointments have proven, this is unfortunately par for the course. Every time the American voters, in their smarmy, conceited, ways, who are overly full of themselves and full of overconfidence, vote as voters for the Republican Party, this is what you're going to get. I don't know what else to tell you, because this isn't new. I mean, this kind of phenomenon happened during the Bush administration. I remember realizing that the very people that were supposed to be, the regulatory agency heads were often completely staffed with people that were, basically industry insiders, lobbyists. Bush did it. Bush Senior did it. Fuck, Papa Reagan did it. They all. This has been an enduring legacy of the Republican Party, and there's a word for this. This is that word under the legal framework is called, regulatory capture. It's what happens when, which is defined as what happens when, the very industries that are supposed to be regulated by the regulatory agencies end up in charge in sending insiders from that industry to helm the very agencies meant to, serve as some kind of check on them. So you end up with polluting industries in charge of a government agency that was meant to protect the public from pollution and to protect the country from pollution. But instead, the polluter decides to donate to politicians all up and down, and donate to the campaigns of politicians up and down, so that eventually he gets to appoint his people to the very agency that was supposed to keep him in check. And this is referred to, like I said, as regulatory capture. Which to me and to my mind, this is a big, massive signal that Trump has found more water, and he's dumping more swamp water into the swamp to expand it into a super swamp. In fact, his whole corrupt administration is just one big, massive swamp. You all know that I've never been, particularly a member of the Republican Party, but you kept asking me why it is that I don't like them. Well, this is a big chunk of it. I've seen how this plays out, and it seems to me that although to some extent the Democratic Party is also bought, it's not bought to anywhere near the same extent, as the GOP, and there is a big difference, so as a consequence of this, where it's like they try a lot harder to serve the actual public interest than, the other party that's in power. Now, I will admit that in all that I want to say about all this, there is, there's always going to be somebody that's going to come in and be like, every time they were in power, they managed to fuck it up anyways. I mean, they had 60 seats and everything. But, to me, it's like we've always had to deal with somebody like, Kirsten Sinema, somebody that wanted to be that way and, wanted to derail our efforts to actually get something done and accomplished as Democrats. Like the unfortunate truth is that it just, when you're not in power, you don't have as much ability to get things done, and unfortunately, Congress has sort of how should I put it, because of the degree of outspokenness to a lot of us, they've basically made it very difficult to do things like, get a discharge petition, because, if you get a petition, you actually have to go around and gather up, all the signatures in order to get it actually done. And, basically a bunch of games have been played to make all those kinds of moves a lot harder to get accomplished, and we have seen an era now where there have been fundamentally ridiculous, walkouts in state governments where the Democrats are in charge for things that really weren't extraordinary measures. We have seen abuses of, the basic tools to obstruct legislation from getting through. And it's completely one-sided, where it's like the Republicans are the ones doing the majority of the obstruction when Democrats are in power. When Democrats are in power, when Republicans are in power, Democrats don't obstruct to anywhere near the same extent, to my great horror. I keep trying to tell Wyden and Merkley that I don't actually want bipartisanship. I think it is not actually a virtue. It is actually all the worst things that have happened in this country have been examples of bipartisanship, and that, they only call it bipartisanship because they're fucking us just as hard, twice as hard, so I mean, would it kill you guys to actually engage in some partisanship as Democrats? Would it kill you? And so anyways, just wanted to make a video about this one and point all this out, because it seems to me that I live in a country where the critical thinking skills are just gone. I mean, that isn't to say that people don't, think, they don't criticize things ever. They do all the time. It's more, there isn't a lot of thoughtfulness to that critique.